first of all, I'd like to invite Tim to introduce himself. Please, Tim, go ahead.
Thanks, Paul. My name is Tim Hermie. I'm based in Belgium. I'm a technical specialist data security at Microsoft since 6 months now. So my focus is on everything data security related, so the purview stack of Microsoft. Before that, I was a freelance consultant for a few years, working together with partners in Belgium and also doing some solo work. I was also a Microsoft MVP Enterprise Mobility and a Microsoft MVP Windows Insider. So my expertise before was more focused on the endpoint management and security stack. And now with tackling compliance, I have a broad overview of the whole security stack, which only has advantages for the customers.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Tim. That's great to have some of your experience on the call today. And Mashok, could you give a bit about your background, please?
Yeah, thank you very much, Paul. Mashok Ahmad, technical specialist, security compliance identity at Microsoft, Dublin-based. Starting the role in January as well, so also about 6 months like Tim. And yeah, covering those topics. If there's any technical questions, etc., I'll help to unblock any blockers and do a presentation if needed, etc.
Thank you very much, Mashok. And interesting that you're based in Dublin. My name is Paul Connolly. I'm from CWSI, based in Dublin, but today I'm actually in Amsterdam. And my role as Client Solutions Director with specialization in security and compliance is I work with many of our larger customers around their data security and compliance programs. I have a background a bit like Tim's, so would have been in networking, security, and telco, and then spent nearly 10 years in the enterprise mobility space, but have recently been specializing in the last 3 or 4 years in the data security and compliance Microsoft stack, and that's mostly where I do my work at the moment. So a little bit around CWSI, for those of you who don't know us. We were founded in Dublin, as I mentioned, over 12 years ago. We have over 135 employees currently across 5 European countries, which are Ireland, the UK, Netherlands, Belgium, and Luxembourg. We have a global customer base, so we service some of the largest multinationals and large European and American companies in the world. And we specialize in managing and securing hybrid work. So all 5 of the constituent member companies that make up the CWSI group have a background in enterprise mobility and security. Most of us grew in the last 12 or 13 years from the post-BlackBerry era, specializing in managing kind of the new mobile devices. And I think that's given us a unique approach and kind of long experience in what it's like to manage, non-standard devices on non-standard networks in non-standard ways, which has become the standard, interesting enough now. So it's mobile working, remote working is what the hybrid working is what we all experience all the time now. We have a direct market channel partner model, and we're also a founding member of an alliance called the Enterprise Mobility Experts Alliance, which is a loose group of similar organizations across Europe, which allows us to share knowledge and resources in the enterprise mobility, security, and compliance spaces. Our purpose, very simply, is to enable the world to work securely from anywhere. So what that means, any application, any device, any network, no compromises. And I think, the compromises piece is very important. Users expect to be able to have a really good experience on their devices. They expect to be able to work with all sorts of different tools in all sorts of different places. And the onus on organizations to provide that kind of best class experience has never been higher. So I'm going to take a little moment here just to do a short poll to see where maybe the audience are in terms of this, in the area of data security. So if you wouldn't mind just filling that in over the next 30 seconds or so. This is just to help myself, Tim, and Mashok get a kind of understanding of where you are in your data security program or roadmap. And some of you might be at the start, some of you might be very advanced, but it would be good to just to understand that so we can hopefully tailor the session to be a bit more useful. So I was going to leave that for a couple more seconds. Okay, hopefully everyone has nearly completed that now. Okay, so let's get the results. Can we share the results on the screen now, please? Not too sure why the results aren't showing there on the screen. For me, is they visible for anybody else? Sorry now.
Yes,
I can
they're visible.
Brilliant. Well, could you guys just summarize them for me then, if you don't mind?
Yeah, of course.
Yeah, Tim, go ahead.
We have 33% who have started or fully implemented. 17% hasn't done anything yet, is in the no phase, and 50% is in the planning stage.
Okay, so we've got a good mix, it sounds like, you know, so a lot of people who haven't started, a lot of people are in planning, and then a couple who are already on the path. So I think that's not a bad representation. Okay. I'd just be interested, Tim, is that in line with what you see yourself in the market with the customers that you work with? Because it certainly seems fairly in line with what I see in terms of the majority of people are in the early stages, with very few that are very mature at this stage.
Yeah, that's definitely what we see also. There's been a big focus in security, but we've seen that most companies now are ending their security track and are only now picking up the data security track. So yeah, it's pretty much what I expected.
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right there. Most people at this point have done quite a lot of work around the kind of core areas of identity and endpoint management, and are only starting to look at maybe the data, the security and compliance side of things right now. So perfect. Okay, so we're going to talk a little bit now about the challenges, or some of the reasons why a data security program is important and why you would want to do one, what some of the drivers behind that are. So I've got some information here. This is probably fairly familiar to some of you. It's been collated by Microsoft. It is obviously global data. It's not necessarily specific to Benelux or Europe, but I think it gives a good kind of indication of where the stats are. So we've got 83% of organizations experience more than one data breach in their lifetime. Now, this I think could be quite accurate. Many people say, "Oh, I haven't had a major data breach," but a data breach can be as simple as someone sending an email with an Excel file to the wrong email address. That may not be enough for you to make a finding or a report to a data protection authority, but that is still technically a data breach. So, and those kind of things happen all the time. So data security incidents widespread, I think, is a fair enough statistic. Malicious insiders accounting for 20% of data breaches. So this was quite interesting. 1 in 5 data breaches potentially coming from insider risk. I think the Verizon security report, which is something I look at every year, has only just come out recently, has some similar kind of numbers. So that is quite high, 1 in 5 data breaches being from insider risk. And there is some, average cost there of 15.4 million. Obviously, that is completely contextual to the size of your organization, and is a broad average. But insider risks tend to be expensive because of the level of impact of the data they can pull. So it's, they have access to maybe more secure things, or they have a better idea what to go looking for when they expose it. And then I think a very important one around the fragmented solution landscape. So, and this I think comes to both the cause and solution side of things. So what do I mean by that? The 80% of decision makers purchasing multiple products. So again, this is something I see all the time. The data security and compliance space is probably maybe not as mature in terms of tooling as the pure security space. So there's a wide variety of tools out there. Many of them are very specific point tools that do one thing quite well, but maybe don't integrate with each other. And a lot of them would have been designed for on-prem data silos, databases, and are only starting to support cloud infrastructure, in particular areas like Teams and collaboration and those side of things. Again, Tim, Mashok, is that aligned with what you see when you work with customers?
Yeah, it's definitely aligned. And I can give you some more numbers even on insider risk. Because if we look at the cybercrime categories, we have the 4 big categories. We have the nation states like Russia, China, North Korea. I think we all know them. We have the criminal enterprises who are really in it for the money. They really have an enterprise with SLA's help desk. Then we have the hacktivists who follow an ideology. I think most of you also know them. But the 4th category is the insider. And in the insider, we have unintentional insider, malicious insider, and inside agents. But some staggering numbers, that insider incidents, they increased by 44% over the last 2 years. More than 2 out of 3 insider threats are caused by negligence, resulting in a staggering 90% of all cyber attacks caused by human error. And privileged users count for your greatest risk. And it takes on an average of 197 days to identify a breach. So I thought that was numbers worth to share.
Yeah, no, some of those numbers are pretty scary. Like the large rise in insider risk is quite interesting. You know, that's something myself I'd be interested to find out what some of the drivers for that would be. I imagine some of it could be down to, you know, people stressed, things post-COVID, potentially more resources being poured in by some of those external threat actors that you mentioned to try and maybe blackmail or bribe or all those kind of different areas. But also that negligence piece, I think, is another key one. You know, that can be driven by a number of factors. A lot of it can be just down to people being very stressed, maybe working across multiple modes and not being well trained in how to do that. And maybe just the proliferation of sharing and data capabilities within tools. All of that, I think, might be drivers there. So it's a really interesting and growing area of concern, I think, for organizations. And something I'd be curious to know if insider risk is high on the agenda for some of the attendees as a risk factor. Okay. So the other one that I meant to ask when I said about a fragmented landscape is also the data sources themselves. And we might talk about that a little more later, but the proliferation of where data can be and what generates data has been growing exponentially over the last number of years. And the amount of data being generated on a daily basis by humans is staggering. So I've got a couple of examples here just to back up those stats, some more real life examples, I suppose, in terms of news headlines. I've tried to contextualize these to the Belgian kind of audience. But again, these are kind of universal themes. But we have a first example here, passwords over 500,000 Belgians leaked in a data breach. Now, this wasn't a kind of a single data breach. This is more of an accumulation of multiple exposures going back to things like the LinkedIn hacks and other hacks, Dropbox hacks. What happens with all those individual different exposures is the data gets collated into large data sets on the dark web and in places like Pastebin and other places. And then they in turn can be kind of breached or shared in bulk. So, you know, I think the interesting thing here is 500,000 people's passwords potentially out there. How many of those people are even aware that their passwords have been breached, so have changed them? And obviously, while we don't typically want to do it, a lot of people will still use the same password for multiple systems, including personal and work. So having all those passwords kind of available does create a lot of exposure to organizations as well as personal. As you mentioned, Tim, you know, the rise in you know, kind of foreign third-party threat actors has become a growing problem. Also, we've got the war in Ukraine, and we've got increase in hacktivism and all those areas, and also the cyber threat from third parties such as China, North Korea, etc. And you know, it's not just kind of rhetoric now. There's been some indications of actual evidence against attacks. So we have an example of Belgium talking to China doing cyber attacks against federal ministries. And it's not just the government. I think a lot of critical infrastructure, national infrastructure and supply chain to those infrastructures is a kind of an attractive target. And obviously there's quite a lot of attacks against companies that have maybe interesting IP that could be developed by third parties. So I think this one is a growing area. Not every maybe organization on the call thinks that they are a potential target for someone like China or North Korea. But if you're part of the supply chain to a major industry or major government supplier, you absolutely are. And that supply chain attack or that supply chain vector is something we see as increasingly as the preferred method of attack by external threat actors. This one I thought was quite interesting because it was a company that actually actively admitted that a cyber attack had caused massive losses. Often it can be difficult to attribute actual costs to a data breach or a cyber attack. You know, we often it's a general term, or it's an actuarial type approach. But in this case, this organization, you know, actively has declared that they have lost significant amounts of money due to loss of confidence in them since their cyber attack. So I thought that was quite interesting, and was one of the more unusual announcements by a company to actually admit the amount of loss that they had. So a lot of focus tends to be on things like reputational damage on share price, which I think is maybe overblown sometimes, because a lot of organizations' share price can recover quite quickly. But the internal operational costs for cleanup following an attack often don't get declared and can be significant, and then obviously potentially loss in confidence from your customers. And then finally, going back to that insider risk and those stats that Tim was talking about, we have a Belgian bank accusing an ex-employee of being behind a data leak of stock option plans. Again, you can imagine this would be quite damaging to a bank. You know, in terms of wealth management or risk management, sorry. You know, banks are expected to be good at this sort of thing. So, you know, loss of confidence can be quite damaging to the banking industry. And there's obviously quite a lot of regulation in that space as well, which would need to be looked at. You know, things like MiFID and other regulations could come into play here. So, again, it's an ex-employee who obviously had access to sensitive data, was able to share that, causing quite a lot of damage. Again, these are all just kind of real world examples of some of the stats that we were talking about a few minutes ago. Tim, Mashok, is there anything you'd like to add in terms of the you know, over and above what we've talked about already, in terms of what Microsoft is seeing, what areas are growing in terms of threat and risk?
Yeah, I can add something on this. We also had another case, and I think this will be most known to a lot of Belgians in the call, of the city of Antwerp that has been hacked, and they have been out for months with their services for the citizens of Antwerp, so it had a really big impact. Also a little bit, what I want to tell you also, that we've all been building on zero trust really badly in the past years. With our layers, our identity layer, our device layer, and data was just another layer of the zero trust model. It may be interesting to look into the extended zero trust model. It's something Forrester came up with, and they put data at the center of zero trust. So instead of working with layers, you work with the pillars, and the data layer is really in the inside, because every layer you set up or every pillar you set up, like the identity, MFA, encryption on devices, it only has one purpose at the end, and it's protecting your corporate data. So you should know that it's the crown jewels that have to be protected.
Absolutely, and I think for me, when I think about protecting data, I always take the assume breach model. So assume that all other controls will fail. What have you got left to protect you once your firewalls, your identity, your endpoint management, your security controls all fail? So I think it's that kind of moving from zero trust and adding data into the layer, and kind of assuming that if they get in, what else have we got to protect ourselves? Or also, you know, zero trust doesn't always do as well protecting against the insider risk. So I think it's very important that you add data security and controls around the data layer on top of all the other layers.
Yeah, true. And to pick up on the insider risk case, there was one really famous case of insider risk, and it's Anthony Lewandowski. I don't know if it rings a bell with some people. He was a former Google engineer and a co-founder of the Google self-driving car project, later known as Waymo. He left Waymo in 2016 to launch Otto, a self-driving truck company. And 8 months later, Anthony Lewandowski, he cashed in. Otto was acquired by Uber, and he got a lot of money for it. He became a high-ranking executive in the self-driving department. But a little later, Waymo, or the copies of Google, they put in a lawsuit against Anthony Lewandowski because he really extracted a lot of confidential information from them. What's good to know from this story, he was forced to declare bankruptcy. He spent 18 months in jail, and he was forced to pay a staggering amount of 180 million in fines and restitutions.
Wow.
So as an affected party, it's good to be able to prevent and recognize insider theft, but also when it happens, that you have the proof to go to court and have some proof that you can put in there to actually show that he has exfiltrated data. Yeah. So insider threats are real and imminent. It should be acted upon immediately, and it's a big focus at Microsoft also.
Yeah, and I think that's a really good point. Is that, you know, we can focus on prevention, and obviously prevention is the goal as much as we can. But again, going back to the assume breach model, it's really important that you have good audit trails and capabilities to, you know, to see what happens, so you can be able to go to court or do whatever you need to do afterwards to help, you know, recover some of the damage. So that's a really great example. Thanks, Tim. So again, I've just been looking at as well at some of the Data Protection Authority of Belgium. I'm not going to attempt to call it its real name because my Dutch or my French is not particularly good. But this is pulling from some stats from the annual report of 2022 around the statistics from the Data Protection Authority. And the kind of key thing here for me is from 2019 to the current date, obviously there was a rise and a dip, but it's still the overall trend is a steady rise in reporting on data breaches. And this is very similar across all European countries, some much more than others, but in all cases, the data breach numbers of reported data breaches are rising. And that there's only the tip of an iceberg in terms of the actual number of data breaches, because a huge amount of them still go unreported. And also from the same publication, I thought this is quite interesting, and again goes back to kind of reiterate some of the statistics that Tim was talking about earlier on. The most common cause of data breaches being human error. So that's the kind of non-malignant or non-malicious type actor where someone has, most typically, and it's amazing that this is still a thing. I've been in IT for a very long time, and for as long as there's been email, there's been an issue with people sending email data to the wrong person, the wrong email address. That is still one of the most common ways today that people lose data. Obviously exacerbated now by people sharing potentially to the wrong locations or inviting guests into conversations where data has been shared, all sorts of different other types of vectors. But human error is still the most significant cause of data breaches at 47%. Hacking, phishing, and malware 25%. Phishing being, I think, the big driver there. Again, year in, year out, phishing is the one of the highest sources of, you know, business email compromise is still one of the highest sources of breaches and how malware and ransomware gets into organizations. And then maybe misuse of access rights is another one. So I thought, again, stats backing up everything that we've been talking about in terms of what we see in organizations. So why is all these things so difficult? So again, it's this proliferation piece. So, you know, most people have probably got good controls around their very structured data. So they might have CRM systems, they might have document management systems, databases who, you know, could be well controlled, good access controls, good compliance controls in place, potentially things like retention, all those kind of areas covered. The area that I spend most of my time talking to customers about is around the unstructured data. So the data that's living in Exchange, online, or other email systems, the data that's living in Teams, collaboration systems, Slack, all these types of tools, shared storage, so your SharePoint, your Google Drive, OneDrive, all these different cloud file systems, huge proliferation of SaaS cloud apps that people work with these days. You know, your Salesforces, your HubSpots, Dropboxes, all these different tools, and a massive proliferation in the types of devices that are accessing the data. All sorts of different mobile devices, tablets, laptops across multiple different operating systems, Chrome OS, Mac OS, Windows, Android. All of these are common now in organizations. and it just makes it much more difficult to take a siloed approach to data security. You really have to look at protecting across the entire estate. So I think that's quite a massive change in how we have to manage data from maybe the old castle wall. Everything went inside the walls is protected, and having a very simple footprint in terms of one device family and one set of platforms. And the amount of data we're creating as humans is growing exponentially. We're passing petabytes and into zettabytes. I'm not even sure what the next measurement scale is after that. And then we're seeing now, obviously huge rise in the amount of video and audio. And now I think with ChatGPT and other AI tools, that's going to only increase even more. The amount of content being generated is going to increase exponentially as it becomes easier for people to do it. And we have just a short graphic here just to kind of talk through what a data security incident can look like. And so, again, talking about that kind of basic setup where you have no visibility to documents, you have no security at the data layer. It's very easy for someone to copy a document to a USB and then maybe upload that to personal Dropbox from another computer, which leads to the document maliciously stolen. Or you can share documents with colleagues, and those colleagues in turn share it externally due to maybe an accident or not understanding the context of the document, because there is no control on the document itself. And that's really what we're talking about here, is putting the controls around the data itself. So just a quick summary on the challenges. Data is growing exponentially. Sharing and collaboration are pivotal for productivity. I think it's an absolute given that all organizations are trying to drive their productivity numbers up, and they see that sharing and collaboration are absolutely key to that. It's really critical that can be done across within organizations and externally to partners and third parties. But as we said, the data storage and processing landscape has become increasingly fragmented. But the value of the data that we are creating is also increasing exponentially. So again, going back to your example there, Tim, from the Waymo example, those kind of numbers of the value of that data to the individuals or to companies is staggering. So all of these lead to an increased number of data breaches, increased disruption of organizations' operations due to data loss or mismanagement. So, the cost of data breaches, even if you don't have maybe a regulatory finding or a fine against you, the cost of cleanup, the cost of, fixing and putting in controls to stop it happening again, all that forensics work to understand what happened, those are massive costs, both in terms of doing them and the opportunity cost of all that, those resources not doing other important work that you want them to be doing. All of this is leading to increasing regulatory oversight. We're seeing much more focus, things like the NIS2 directive, which is coming in to try and put more focus on and maturity on the critical infrastructure and all the supply chain I spoke about already, and things like MiFID, GDPR, and individual sector-specific regulations, because there's so much worry over data breaches, and all of these leads to increased costs. So how do we solve all of these different challenges? Just going to take a quick pause there to see, have we had any questions come in on anything we spoke about so far? No? Again, just to let the audience know, please do ask questions as we go through. We'd love to answer anything and any weird questions that you have. The weirder, the better. Okay, so how do we solve some of the problems that we spoke about? At CWSI, we kind of have a four-step process. Again, this is probably nothing too unusual, but we start with discussion, then we move to discover, then design and deploy. So what does this actually mean? So the first thing to understand is, what are your requirements for data security? So what are you actually trying to achieve with your data security program or strategy? What are your business requirements? What are the business looking for? What are they they want something obviously that's easy to use. Finance, HR, sales, product, all these different areas will have different requirements around what they want their data security to look like. So you really need data security management. One of the most critical things is that it's a business-led discussion, because they're the only ones who can really, they're the data owners, they're the only ones who can decide what the classification or protections that are adequate to data should be. And also they need to explain what they do with that data. How do they process it? How do they share it? What third parties do they interact with? How does that data move around internally? What tooling do they use? What's it integrated with? Then we would also look at things like regulatory requirements. Obviously, GDPR will come into play for personal data. Depending on your vertical or your sector, there could be all sorts of other regulatory requirements, SOX compliance, MiFID, maybe specific country-specific health or other financial acts could come into play. So again, it's worth understanding what those requirements look like. And then finally, other third-party requirements. So potentially, for example, CWSI, we are a supplier of services to many very large multinationals. So they would have a lot of security requirements on us. For example, we're ISO 27001 because that's a minimum requirement from some of our customers. So what third-party requirements come into play around your data security that could lead to some of the controls you might want to put into place. So it's very important to discuss all of these requirements, because this will help you get to the next stage, which is to then get to a design. But typically then you need to discover your data. So now that you kind of got an understanding of the requirements, you need to assess the data landscape, assess your risk. So you need to identify, again, Tim used this phrase earlier on, the crown jewels. What is the most important data to your organization? What do you want to protect the most? That's the best place to start. You can iterate through the rest of your data, but it's critical that you protect your crown jewels. Understand how that data is being processed. How is it moving through your organization, and try and discover some risky behavior processes. So how is it being shared? Is there any automation around that? What controls are in place in terms of business controls to ensure that things are done correctly? And then you can assess and prioritize the risks around your data. There is some tooling that can help you with this. Microsoft has some tooling to help you identify data in terms of sensitive info types, trainable classifiers, those kind of tools. Also, we at CWSI have some tooling that we can plug into tenants that can enable us to rapidly assess the different data types and look at how it's being shared as well. So this can be done a lot quicker in a Office 365 environment than it would have been to do in an on-prem environment, because this is often where I see a lot of organizations struggle. Tim, is this an area that you think organizations think is really hard and maybe don't realize that there's tooling there to help them? Or is this something that you think organizations are getting a handle
on? From my experience working with the customer the last half year, they are also struggling a lot with, like you say, identifying the crown jewels, or maybe asking too much from themselves also. Like they want to encrypt all data, which is always for me a no-go. You have to look at which data is critical and which one will I encrypt, because otherwise you will disrupt the impact on your end users, on the business. So it's a really important thing to assess that really good and have a good data classification scheme before you start implementing stuff.
Yeah, absolutely. That's exactly the same approach we would take. And then the next stage is to get to design. So now you need to start putting a design in place, and there tends to be 4 key areas that we tend to work with. You might start with just one, or you might do a combination of them. But I think exactly as Tim just mentioned, data classification is very important. Once you understand what your data landscape looks like and you can start to classify it, even if the only classification you put in is the sensitive or confidential kind of classification around that crown jewels, that can then allow you to build out controls based around that classification, and you can start to get into a more mature state in terms of managing your risk. Data lifecycle management is also really important. So, retention and records management. We obviously don't want to keep data forever. All that proliferation, the more data you have, the harder it is to manage. So it's very important that you put some controls around that. And again, there might be regulatory requirements for you to do so. So, you might have to classify some data like as sensitive personal and try and follow the data minimization principle from GDPR to close out that data as soon as it's no longer needed for processing. So data lifecycle management is really important. And then once you've got data classification in place, the obvious next step is to talk about data loss prevention. So what controls do I want to put in place to stop this data being lost? So Tim mentioned encryption. That's a really good control. Access controls, where you can use the tooling to stop people uploading or downloading data based on the label that's applied. There's a huge variety of DLP controls out there that you can leverage once you have your data classified. Obviously, you can also use those controls without classification, because they can leverage some of the automation around sensitive info types and stuff as well. But personally, my recommendation is you try and use a classification schema, because it just makes the whole DLP thing much more simple to understand and implement. And then finally, there's the insider risk capability. So again, just with the visibility that you get at the tenant level in terms of your audit logs, there's an amazing set of controls there to allow you to understand and identify insider risk and potentially look for signals that might lead you to start an investigation into potential issues. And then obviously the DLP and classification controls can mitigate the impact if you do have a rogue employee. And then finally, how would you implement? So implementing your strategy, always start small, I think is my advice. Looking for one or two specific business cases, like a specific team like finance or HR, maybe someone who's got a good structural understanding of their data and a good understanding of their business requirements. Remember, data owners decide the classification risk protection levels. It's not an IT or even an IT security decision. It should come from the data owners, because they understand their own data. So make sure that they're involved. Using things like manual classification methods can be a really good way to prototype or POC a data security strategy. So there's lots of capability within the tooling to be able to manually classify data, showing the end users how easy it is to apply a label, putting information in the tooltips, using things like allowing for exceptions and overrides, all those different things. So it's very important that you get a seamless user experience, otherwise you're going to fail. So that's the last point that is really important. If you try to implement a overly secure, like Tim mentioned, encrypt everything, lock everything down type approach, you're going to have an impact on the business. You're going to put your users against you, and you're probably actually going to increase your potential risk as people try and go around those controls. So that's kind of the key approach that we would recommend. I suppose Tim, Mashok, Microsoft, as far as I understand it, would recommend a very similar approach to what I've just outlined.
Yeah, definitely. I completely agree what you're saying. Especially the part on the end users, where we can help with adoption with policy tips when they put something critical in a document, that they have a pop-up from, hey, this is critical information, put this label on it. It helps with adopting the end users also. So I totally agree with what you said, Paul.
Perfect. Thank you very much. Yeah, and Microsoft, some of you will have seen this, have this kind of broken down into a nice kind of visual graphic with this triangle. I suppose, Tim, Mashok, do you want to just talk people through the evolution of this model? Because I think it's a really great simplified way of looking at the three kind of key areas around data security.
Yeah, we come up with the data security word instead of using compliance, because we're more focusing on protecting our data, on securing our data. And we have the three big pillars there, like you said, information protection, which is all about discovering your data, classifying your data, auto-labeling, manual with tooltips. The possibilities are endless there. Then we have the data loss prevention. Once you have discovered and classified your data, what happens with my data, or where can my critical data not go to? We cannot extract it from a USB drive. We cannot upload it to a Google Drive, for example. The adaptive protection feature is something really recent that we released. It's a feature of insider risk management, and it allows you to give your user an adaptive score based on his behavior. So for example, if an end user gives in his resignation because he's going to work with one of the top competitors, It will be set in the HR system. The HR system will be linked with the inside the risk management system, and his adaptive score will go from low to high because he's a high target of exfiltrating data because he's going to another company that he's going to. So adaptive protection is really nice. It's a feature that's inside the risk management, but you can also use it already in your data loss prevention policies. Why do we use this in a triangle, those three pillars? Because we really believe as Microsoft that they work better together. So you have the information protection part, which is all about discovering, classifying data, data loss prevention, where can our data not go to, and inside the risk management really works with DLP in the backbone and gives you great insights on user behavior also. Also, for example, if an end user tries to exfiltrate data because he's going to another company, those sequences that he does, the first downloading, renaming, downgrading, labeling, printing, they will be put into a sequence inside the risk management, and from there you can make a case and put it to HR or to legal so they can follow up and contact the end user, for example.
Yeah, I think that some of those things like adaptive protection are really exciting because it's really approaching a appropriate risk management model, which is where we all want to get to, because taking too simplistic a risk management approach can lead to either not putting in enough controls or putting in too heavy-handed controls. So having something that can adapt based on the context of the risk, I think that's absolutely what a mature security program or tool set should do. So I'm really excited by some of those capabilities, and I think the incorporation potentially in the future of things like Copilot and other AI tools can only enhance those things. So it's quite exciting, and I quite like this triangle approach because it's the three key areas, but also for me that circle in the middle, a bit like the wheel that we use in CWSI. This is an iterative process; it never stops. You see, you never stop working at data security. There's always going to be new types of content. There's always going to be new types of integrations. There's going to be growing use cases of how data is shared. So you constantly have to reevaluate what that looks like and how you protect it. So you're always going around in a circle across those three kind of areas of the triangle. So I think it's a nice visual way to represent a program. Okay. So with that, and speaking about some of those new features, I'd like to hand over now to Mashok, who is going to take us through some of the Microsoft roadmap, what he's allowed to tell us anyway. Obviously, some of these things are going to be under NDA, so we'll only be able to talk about some of the key areas. But I think there's a lot of exciting development, and I know from speaking to Microsoft that in the new Microsoft year starting in July, that the data security area is going to be a key pillar of focus for Microsoft in the next 12 months. So I'm expecting to see quite a lot of exciting development in that tool set. So yeah, Mashok, if you want to take over there.
Yeah, thank you very much, Paul. As you mentioned, there's lots of new features coming to data security, but also to insider risk management, which we're going to have a look at. And since 33% of the audience is implementing or has already implemented compliance with data security, it's going to be a topic of interest. So let's dive in and see first what's new in Microsoft Purview and more specifically in data security. So there's has been recent platform improvements. One second, sorry, I lost the presentations. So there's new capabilities. One of the new capabilities is new improved sensitive information types, classification templates, and updated schema to improve accuracy. Another new feature is updated trainable classifiers and new named identities. This is currently in public preview. There's role-based access control roles for granular permissions. Auto labeling in Office apps as sensitivity label setting now supports exact data match, and Activity Explorer captures audit logs from all Microsoft information protection and data loss prevention components. Co-authoring on Microsoft information protection encrypted documents is now also generally available. This was what Tim mentioned as well with encryption. In regards to information protection, we currently have best-in-class classification technologies. First, we have over 200 out-of-the-box sensitive info types that can be used to detect credit card numbers, social insurance numbers, driver license numbers, anything that can be detected by an algorithm. In addition to the out-of-the-box capabilities, customers can also clone them, edit them, or create their own using regular expressions, keywords, and dictionaries. These are all available today and can be used in Microsoft Purview information protection. The next technology is named Entities. It's new. It was released earlier this year in public preview. It is focused on the collection of person names, medical terms, or drug names, for example. It's an incredible new functionality because it specifically addresses accurate detection of regulatory compliance data. Compliance regulations like PCI, PII, GDPR, California Consumer Protection Act, and Japanese privacy regulations are global in nature, and these are best used in combination with other sensitive information types. The next technology is named now exact data match is a technique that provides lookup to exactly match content with unique customer data. It scales to large customer requirements and supports up to 100 million rows. This is also available today and actually has a brand new user experience to help in creation of exact data match information types. Trainable classifiers are also a new platform available to you. You can choose from over 30 pre-trained machine learning models. In addition to that, you can create your own, and these are now integrated in the whole Microsoft Purview information protection platform, including data loss prevention labels and auto-labeling. Last but not least, credential sensitive info types. There are 42 new sensitive info types used to detect digital authentication, credential, and passwords. This address a critical need of our customers to protect themselves against sharing of certificates and credentials and potential hacking, which is a really big concern to our customers that they have brought up. Credential sensitive information types can be used in auto-labeling DLP policies to detect credentials being shared in chats and email. In order to help you get started, we provide a number of predefined policies that use the right combination of these classifiers. For example, the one shown on the screen is the US Graham-Leach-Bailey Act, and this includes machine learning models, named entities, and sensitive info types, all combined for the best possible detection of sensitive information to meet this regulatory requirement. We recommend you get started using these templates and adjust them as needed.
Masha, sorry, just one thing I think is really exciting there. People may not realize those SITs. I think those SITs are a great place to start if you're maybe coming at this from an IT infrastructure background, because being able to find things like Amazon and Azure keys and how they're being shared and stored in your organization. Are they in engineers' OneDrives? Are they in places they shouldn't be? I think is a really simple, powerful way of, even just in the IT team, starting to understand the power of data security and discovery. So for me, that's always a good one as a conversation starter when talking to an IT audience, because it's easier to understand maybe than the GDPR or some of the compliance elements. So just thought I'd mention that.
Yeah, of course, it's another possible data leakage as well that can be exploited. We often have had some Word file with some credentials in them, which is not best practice, but it happens everywhere, as you mentioned. And yeah, this is a cool new feature. So more on the information protection roadmap. There is now OCR, optical character recognition, in Exchange Online, Teams, SharePoint Online, Endpoint DLP. Currently in preview, will be generally available normally in July 2023. There's full document fingerprinting in preview and expected to go GA in the second quarter of the calendar year. I'm not going to run through every feature, only the more highly requested ones. There's support for pop-up messages in Outlook that can ward, justify, or block emails being sent with sensitivity labels. which is currently in preview and will be available, generally available soon. The inheritance of attachment labels to email messages has been in general availability since March. And then in regard to the server-side admin capabilities, user scoping of role-based access controls. So you can delegate management remediation authority for different people in different regions, organization units with role-based access control. And more on the server-side admin capabilities is configuring policy tips for emails with sensitivity labels, which is generally available since March 2023. That's one of the things Tim mentioned that will help your end user to be more vigilant against the data that they share because of the safety tips. In regards to data loss prevention, there's now Teams DLP, which is near real-time data loss prevention. So if sensitive information is shared through chat, be it inside or outside the organization, it will be flagged. And the user will receive a message on why they should not share the information. They can always bypass it if they feel that they need to share it, but they will be trained into being more vigilant in what they share. SharePoint Online OneDrive now supports unscannable files, and you can also use labels as a condition for PDFs, also in Exchange Online. In regards to cross-platform, you can now use the if not labeled condition to automate better. And there's also a revamp DLP policy tips for all platforms to support more conditions and introduce consistent platform behavior. On the endpoint data loss prevention side, there's website DLP via Edge browser, authorized printer, USB, and network share. That's another thing that was mentioned. Network location as a condition, advanced classification, fingerprinting, and multi-session VDI support, context data in audit telemetry, upload to cloud restriction per policy, protect files stored in network shares, and protection real time for unclassified files. More on the DLP roadmap, as mentioned before, the OCR support for SharePoint Online, OneDrive, Exchange Online, and extending the file format coverage. So more file types, true type detection, document metadata, and label extraction. On the side of competitive unified DLP, you can now protect sensitive content on Citrix and Windows Virtual Desktop environments. What we expect in the second half of the calendar year is again, the role-based access controls, more granular role-based access controls where you can delegate management remediation authority for different people in different regions or organization units for SharePoint and Defender. In regards to detection and remediation, there's contextual evidence for DLP policy matches on endpoint, the ability to fetch the original file resulting in policy match as evidence, protection of unclassified and untouched files on endpoint at the time of egress, visibility into configuration and policy sync status of devices, visibility into matched condition and value in audit logs as a result of DLP policy match. Let's look at...
We're probably going to come towards the end of time now, so there's a huge amount of stuff coming up in this roadmap, everyone can see. I think, you know, and this is only the top of the iceberg, I think, on what's actually coming from Microsoft. There's a huge amount of other stuff that we can't speak about today that I would encourage people to speak to their own Microsoft representatives about and look at their planning. I think for those majority of the audience that we have in terms of where they are starting at the beginning, we've covered a lot of today. I think that would help you, begin to understand what's involved and how you would approach a data security program. Just going to show one last little bit here, because I think we're going to do a quick poll. I just wanted to understand before everyone heads away today. Hopefully, this was useful. So, if you could just maybe answer that poll there really quickly. The feedback we get from these sessions helps us to design them to be better next time. So I just wanted to find out, based on some of what we covered today, are you more likely to look at the data security tools in Purview? Especially all of those of you who are maybe in that evaluation or early design stage. I think what you can see is a comprehensive set of tools there which are under active development. So for me, it's a very exciting space to be in. It's an area where there's lots to learn and lots to look at. Let's close that poll now in a couple of seconds, and then we'll just do a little final wrap up. And I'd like to just thank everybody for their attendance. Are you guys able to see the results? Because it's
we have the results.
It's a hidden envelope for me.
I see them. The yes answer has 76%, 60%. So, and the not sure 33%. So it's a good answer. Brilliant. Look, that's great. And so that hopefully tells myself and Tim and Mashok that the session was useful. So I just want to wrap up there. Thank everyone for their attendance. Hopefully you can see my screen again there, everybody. Yeah. Yes. Okay, cool. So on the screen, you should see a QR code. I swear it is not a trap. People always get worried on a data security or compliance thing that QR codes are a trap. But if you'd like to book a session to speak to one of our team around anything that was covered today, you can use that code to do so. Or else you could reach out to us on any of the contact details on screen, or we will be sending a recording of this session and copies of the slides to everyone who attended, and contact details will be present there as well. So again, please come and have a chat with us about anything we've talked about that might be of interest, where we could maybe help you develop your strategy, or if you're facing a particular problem or challenge around the Purview suite or implementing any element of it, we'd love to talk to you. I'd like to really thank Tim and Mashok for their time today. It's great to get people from Microsoft with their depth of knowledge onto sessions like this, and to get a visibility into the roadmap and development that Microsoft are putting into the products. So thank you very much, Tim and Mashok. It was my pleasure to be here, Paul. It was a pleasure. Thank you. And it looks like to thank the audience today for your participation, and hope you all have a really good day, and look forward to hearing you all soon. Thank you very much.